Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you for joining us today and seek your good wishes and your blessings so that we can continue with the Srimad Bhagavatam 10th canto, 20th chapter. Very interesting chapter. I'd like to seek the blessings of the Lord to dive into this chapter. Such an interesting chapter. So,
Kiraya Varshadharabhid Hanya Manana Vivyatu Abhibhuya Mana Vyasanir Yathadok Saja Chetashaha. Just as devotees whose minds are absorbed in the personality of Godhead remain peaceful, even when attacked by all sorts of dangers, the mountains in the rainy season were not at all disturbed by the repeated striking of the rain-bearing clouds.
very good. So this is all about the rainy season and autumn in Vrindavan. Advent of the rainy season. The elder cowherd men and ladies were amazed to hear about the forest fire and the killing of the demon Pralamba. And they concluded that Krishna and Balaram must be exalted demigods who had appeared in Vrindavan. Then the life-giving rainy season began, and the sky rumbled with thunder and lightning flashed. So just before this, of course, the summer season was there, and it's devastating sometimes, especially in Vrindavan, especially in Bharat. 50 degrees centigrade, so usually it's the maximum, but it's very, very hot. So this chapter is no pastimes, but it's got lots of very nice philosophical points which are worth going through. Dense clouds covering the sky. So they're giving an example. It's like the soul, which is covered by the modes of nature. The sky is vast, and the soul is also extremely powerful. More powerful than modes of nature. But because the soul is on its own, it's considered to be marginal energy, whereas the three modes are external energy of the Lord. So it can become covered if it's not connected with the internal energy of the Lord. So just like the sky is huge, humongous, but the clouds can cover the sky. So the soul can be covered by modes of nature. After drinking up the water for 8 months, the sun now releases the water. Clouds are shaken and swept across the sky. So this example is that of a merciful person who gives their lives for the world. So just like the sun is releasing the water, giving relief to earth, to the residents of earth, similarly, merciful people do the same. They give their lives for the world. The emaciated earth was nourished, just like a person who has undergone austerities become nourished after getting the fruits of his austerities. So it was emaciated because there was sun for such a long time without too much rain. Just like the person who undergoes austerities, there's a lot of tapasya. He performs, he denies himself sense enjoyment, but then becomes nourished when the fruits of his austerities come to him. And the example is Hiranyakashipu. He was bodiless, practically speaking. Just skeletons were existing, and he was maintaining his life airs within those skeletons. So when Brahma came, he sprinkled water from his kamandalu, and immediately Hiranyakashipu was rejuvenated. So in the same way, the glowworms shown in the evening shine. That's not shouldn't be shown. It should be shone. Shine really. Glowworms shine in the evening twilight while the stars are covered. Just like in the age of Kali, the predominance of sinful activities, glowworms, allow atheistic doctrines to overshadow. So twilight is the atheistic doctrines, to overshadow the true knowledge of the Vedas, which are the stars. Very interesting example, this one. The frogs start croaking upon hearing the thunder. Just like the students, the Guru Kulis, they begin chanting the Mahamantra, or the chanting the teachings that the Guru has taught when called upon by the spiritual master. With the advent of the rainy season, the insignificant streams which had become dry begin to swell and strayed from their proper courses, just like the body, property, and money of a man controlled by the urges of his senses. So our senses are not under our control, so we don't have control over our body, property, and money. Just like the streams become become flooded and they stray from their proper courses. So then the next section of verses, the earth became beautiful with green grass. So then the rainfall nourishes everyone. Red insects and white mushrooms. Thus the earth appeared like a person who has suddenly become rich. If one is poor, one is very unattractive actually in this world, because this world judges everybody by the wealth they possess. So when somebody is wealthy, then they become very beautiful. So the earth became beautiful with green grass, red insects, white mushrooms, like a person who suddenly become wealthy. The fields gave joy to the farmers, because the farmers know that this is the source of sustenance, not just for them, but for everyone. But not to the materialistic people, city people, who fail to understand how everything is under the control of the Supreme. So materialistic people, they don't really care for the farming people. Not sure how they think their food is getting to their tables. But so in the same way, people who are materialistic, they cannot understand that everything is under the control of the Supreme Lord. All creatures become attractive by drinking the rainwater, just like devotees become beautiful by serving the Lord. So when we're serving the Lord, we're very, very fortunate. We should consider ourselves extremely, extremely lucky. It's not something that is given freely to able to serve the devotees and the lordships. As devotees' minds remained peaceful during difficulties, the mountains were not disturbed by heavy striking of the rain. And this is one of the beauties of the Bhagavad Gita. It gives us this strength of character, as Krishna describes how to live in this world to Arjuna. In the rainy season, the roads become covered with grass and mud. Similarly, neglected scriptures become covered and corrupted by the passage of time. So scriptures which are hidden, which have not manifested, unfortunately, people can corrupt them by misinterpreting these literatures. Just like the roads in the rainy season become covered with grass and mud. Lightning moving from one cloud to another was like lusty women moving from one man to another. This is very common in this current age and in the West especially. As a rainbow has no string, right? Rainbow, the bow, is a curved bow of Indra, but it doesn't have a string. Right? Normally a bow would have a string, but rainbows don't. So when the Lord appears, he is free from any strings, any material contact. He is unlike ordinary persons because he remains free from all material qualities and independent of all material conditions. So rainbow is describing the condition of the Lord who is free from material contamination. So when we see rainbow, we can remember that. When we hear lightning, we can so remember this as well. It's interesting. There was one particular thing I remembered, but I can't find it in this chapter. I thought it was in this chapter. But I've got it at the end anyway. I will come to it. Symptoms of rainy season, 19 to 24 verses. As the moon was covered by clouds, which were illumined by the moon's rays, so the living entity being is covered by false ego, which itself is illumined by consciousness. So this is really extraordinary. So the moon covered by clouds, but the clouds are illumined by the moon's rays in the first place. So our consciousness, the soul, is what illumines the ego, but unfortunately it's become false. So the living entity is covered by this false ego, but this false ego is actually emanating from the consciousness anyway. The peacocks danced when seeing the clouds, just as a distressed family man becomes happy on seeing pure devotees, or when devotees visit their homes, they become very happy. After the thin and dry trees drank the newly fallen rainwater through their feet, their various bodily features blossomed. Similarly, one whose body has grown thin and weak from austerity again exhibits his healthy bodily features upon enjoying the material objects gained through that austerity. So this is a classic example of Hiranyakashipu. The cranes continued living on the riverbanks, although much debris was there, just as materialistic people remain at home despite so many disturbances. And the example of that is Dhritarashtra. After the war, he continued to stay in Kurukshetra in the palace. His sons had all died, yet he continued to remain there in the care of Yudhishthir and the Pandavas. And Vidur came and he woke him up, shook him up. What are you still doing here? Your sons have died. You're living effectively in the home of your enemy. Of course, Pandavas were not the enemy, but Vidur just shook him up to get him out of his attached consciousness, happy to be in luxury, living in luxury. So this comes often when one gets old. Prabhupada, Guru Maharaj used to describe this very nicely. He said, when you grow old, the family members, they will be just thinking, when will this old man die? He's such a burden. he described it so so well. It just remains in the consciousness. When will this old man die? Yeah, he's just a burden on the whole family. So before that happens, ideally, we should leave home. We should go to the holy place and live there. So that's really very powerful. Let's not become old and a burden to anybody. Let's just take shelter of the Supreme Lord. Very powerful this is. Very, very powerful. The floodwaters broke through the irrigation dikes in the agricultural fields, just as in Kali Yuga, the atheistic false theories break down the boundaries of Vedic injunctions. And the biggest atheistic theory is the Big Bang theory, and it's taken such a hold of the Western world. It's without question, the teachers teach this to the children. The Big Bang theory is the most ridiculous theory. And whenever we go to a school, we try to express this. How can you have order from an explosion? Try it at home. Of course, we don't tell them that. But from an explosion, we can never have order. But this Big Bang theory has, really taken hold of Western philosophy. How we are all here because of this accidental event. So ridiculous. That breaks down the boundaries of Vedic injunctions. The clouds gave water for all beings' benefit, just as the king gives charity to the city. So that was most of it, I think, in terms of examples of wonderful philosophical points. When the forest became full of fruits, Lord Krishna and Balaram with their friends went there to enjoy. The Lord saw the joyful Aborigine girls of the forest, the trees dripping sweet sap, and mountain waterfalls. When it rained, the Lord would enter a cave or a hollow of a tree to play and to eat roots and fruits. Lord Krishna would take his meal of boiled rice and yogurt sent from home in the company of Lord Shankarshan and the cowherd boys who regularly ate with him. They would all sit down to eat on a large stone near the water. Lord Krishna watched the contented bulls and calves and cows sitting on the grass, green grass. Thus, observing the beauty and opulence of Vrindavan's rainy season, Krishna offered respects to that season. Extraordinary. Vrindavan forest improved from the rains and was full of ripened dates, mangoes, blackberries, and other fruits. Lord Krishna and his boyfriends and Lord Balaram entered the forest to enjoy the new seasonal atmosphere. The cows, being fed by new grass, became very healthy, and their milk bags were all very full. When Lord Krishna called them by name, they immediately came to him out of affection, and in their joyful condition, the milk flowed from their bags. Lord Krishna was very pleased when passing through the Vrindavan forest by the side of Govardhan. And after the seventh year, they moved to Nandgaon. Okay. When Balaram and Keshav were living in Vrindavan, the fall season arrived with its cloudless sky, clear water, and gentle wind. The autumn season revived the lotus flowers and restored the various bodies of water to the original purity. Just as devotional service purifies the mind of fallen yogis when they return to it. So sometimes this happens often because we're used to this world. We go back to the pleasures of this world, understanding that actually there's nothing higher than Krishna's, the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. But because this world is so strong, the Maya is so strong, sometimes devotees fall, but invariably they come back. So this is the effect of the autumn season. It revives the lotus flower, it restores the various bodies of waters to the original purity. So those who may go away, they come back. It's as if they come back, and devotional service purifies those personalities. Devotional service can purify everything. Autumn cleaned the earth of its covering of mud and purified the contaminated water in the same way that loving service rendered to Krishna frees the members of the 4 spiritual orders from their respective troubles. So this is the ashram, varna ashram, varna ashram. So the ashram bit, Krishna, this is the example that autumn clears away the mud, just like Krishna, service to Krishna, clears away the troubles arising from the 4 spiritual orders. And there are troubles. Brahmachari, great austerity. Grihastha, great responsibility. Vanaprastha, again, austerity. Sannyas, even more austere. The clouds, having given up all they possessed, shone with purified effulgence, just like peaceful sages who have given up all material desires are free of sinful propensity. This is a really hard thing to do, as we know. material desires, they come again and again and again. In this children's class, we had a question from one of the students said, why do we get desires? Why do we have desires? So the soul actually can only have desires, right? Can't do anything else. It's spirit, but it's independent of Krishna, but at the same time, it's dependent on Krishna. It's the only activity it can actually do is desire. Krishna does the rest. So desires come even into the minds of the peaceful sages. But Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that when desires come into the minds of the sages, it's just like the rivers going into the ocean. The desires come, but the rivers come, but the ocean is still. It's not going to overflow. So similarly, when desires come into the mind of the sages, they are peaceful. They're not agitated by the desires, just like the ocean is not agitated by the rivers that come into it. Really nice example. During this season, the mountains sometimes released their pure water and sometimes did not. Just as experts in transcendental science sometimes gave the nectar of transcendental knowledge and sometimes they don't. Sometimes, like Guru Maharaj people used to come and see him, and usually he gave transcendental knowledge, but sometimes he just would sit quietly. He would know when to speak and when not to speak. Expert. As a miserly person, overly absorbed in family life, suffers because he cannot control his senses. The fishing in the shallow water have to suffer the autumn sun heat. So this is where most of us are at in family life and unable to control the senses. And we struggle. It's a real struggle. So just like the fish rather, who is in shallow water, has to suffer this autumn sun heat. If it was deep water, this fish is not affected by the heat of the sun. So if our spiritual life is deep, then the heat will come, but we won't be affected. With the arrival of autumn, the ocean and the lakes become still, just as a sage who has stopped all material activity and given up recitation of Vedic mantras. This is quite interesting, given up recitation of Vedic mantras. That can make one puffed up, thinking that I'm a great Vedic philosopher, or I know the scriptures very well. But actually, that's a sense, that's a part of pride, false ego. I have to be very careful of pride. The autumn moon, so now we're into a different phase. The autumn moon relieved all creatures of the heat of the sun's rays, just as wisdom relieves a person of the misery caused by identifying with material body. So Arjuna was relieved of the difficulties he foresaw because Krishna advised him that his identity is different from that of the material body he possesses. And as Lord Mukund relieves Vrindavan ladies of distress of the separation from him. So we'll see that in the next few chapters. The full moon shone S-H-O-N-E, in the sky, surrounded by stars, just as Krishna shone brightly on the earth, surrounded by the Vrishnis. Of course, in this country, it's very difficult to see the stars. But I remember years ago when we were in Bharat one time, middle of the night, we looked up and, my goodness, I've never seen so many stars. And there was the moon shining right in the middle of it all. So very interesting. By the influence of the autumn season, all the cows, doe, women, female birds become fertile and were followed by their respective mates in search of sexual enjoyment, just as activities performed for the service of the Lord are automatically followed by beneficial results. So doing bhakti just gives automatically auspicious results. And then finally, the autumn sun. When the autumn sun rose, all lotus flowers blossomed, except the night blooming kumut. Just as in the presence of the strong king, everyone becomes fearless, except the thieves. The thieves become fearful. In all the towns and villages, people held great festivals, performing the Vedic fire sacrifice for honoring and tasting the first grains of the new harvest. The earth was beautified by the presence of Krishna and Balaram. The merchants, sages, kings, and brahmachari students, kept in by the rain, were at last free to go out and attain their desired objects, just as those who achieve perfection in this life can, when the proper time comes, leave the material body, attain their respective forms. It's a question of patience. This rain isn't always going to be there. So in our lives, there are going to be many times when there's going to be a lot of difficulties, but it'll pass. And there will be opportunity again to become relieved of all the difficulties. This is the example I was looking for. I couldn't find it. I'm sure it was in this chapter. Anyway, a person who is intelligent but does not believe in God is like a beautiful flower, like this beautiful rose, which has no fragrance. In the UK, whenever you buy a flower, generally speaking, it won't have a fragrance. So there's a lot of people who are very, very intelligent, but just like having a flower without any fragrance. Intelligence means to know God. So that's the end of this chapter. Anybody, any questions before we go to the instructions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
No questions, but just a comparison as to what happens in material life and then compared to the devotional service or the spiritual life. Various things are, isn't it, in the chapter?
That's right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a really amazing. And Prabhupada's, I can't remember the name of the book, but this has been put into a book, and it was a very famous book. I had a copy. I don't know. I couldn't find it this morning, but yeah, it's a really fascinating chapter.
Yes, it is.
Philosophical.
Philosophical, yes.
Yeah, it's good for the philosophers.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much, Naniman. Thank you for that feedback.
We don't see the glowworms here, but we used to see them a lot in Africa.
Yes, that's right. Even in Bharat, you can see them.
Bharat also, yes.
Yeah. Here, this country is really unusual. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Thank you. Well, we don't really have a summer. In Bharat, they have a summer. It's hot.
Glowworms are there all the time.
No, I know, but I'm just talking about the autumn. Okay. You know, the effect of autumn season, it's not, we would think, so what, autumn's just come. But all the UK seasons are all mixed up. You know, in one day you can have all the 4 seasons going at the same time. But in Bharat, when it's hot, it's hot.
Then you have the rain.
And when it's rainy, it rains.
I suppose it's the size of the island tucked away in the northern hemisphere that just makes it difficult for sunshine to shine for longer. The clouds just take over and get the rain.
That's right. That's right. There was a saying, wasn't it? The sun never sets on the British Raj. Actually, it never rises.
Yeah, exactly. It's where they ruled in Africa, in India. That's where the sun never set. But in UK, because they never saw the sun, they were trying to disguise. Haribo.
Hare Krishna. Okay, so Madhu Simple, like to give us some instructions. Hare Krishna, Madhusan Babu? Yeah, good, good. Kamakshi, we have lost him.
I think he's trying to get his unmuted. He's there. I was in the kitchen.
Unmute, yeah.
Okay.
Haribol, Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
So, chapter 20. These cantos go about, I don't know how many chapters. I know, look at
90.
90.
90. Yeah, we're plowing through them. Chapter 20. Jai Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, there are a lot of comparisons made with the seasons in Vrindavan, with life concepts and principles and conceptions and that of the material life. So there's a lot of examples. Clouds are compared with this, and they cover up with that, material knowledge, 3 gunas, they say. So many things like that. But ultimately, it's the seasons, Vrindavan, how they're compared. So just for example, in verse 8, it says, in the evening, twilight, during the rainy season, the darkness allowed the glowworms, but not the stars to shine forth. Just as in the age of Kali, the predominance of sinful activities allows atheistic doctrines to overshadow the true Vedic knowledge of the Vedas. So this is what we face. And Sri Prabhupada also comments that in the age of Kali, persons who are atheists or miscreants become very prominently visible, whereas persons who are actually following the Vedic principles for spiritual emancipation are practically obscured. So in this age, this is where we find that the followers of Vedic and the Vedic principles are very much obscured. And we see how Sanatana Dharma is being quashed every time. Everyone wants to work against it, and the true aspects of Bharat's knowledge of Bhagavad Gita and all that is minimized rather. And so, but we have to stand by Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, Vedic knowledge. Ultimately, you have to get know Krishna. And as Bhagavad Gita says, Vedas, Sarvaham Eva Vedas. Through Veda, I am the conclusion of the Vedas, and through the Vedas, I am to be known. So, but this chapter, obviously, the descriptions are quite amazing. Okay, Haribol.
Thank you so much. Very good. Hare Krishna. Okay, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Are there any questions, any comments? Otherwise, we can move on to the Shinga Kavach.